And it said that a number of these had been sliced out of the text with a razor blade. That leads us to two conclusions. Were the kids too broke to put a dime in the Xerox machine, or had some of them been purposely removed? So that information began to disappear. And it wasn't just the magnetic fields, that were important. It was also basic understandings of the nature of frequencies themselves, frequencies that could go on any kind of a carrier wave. I'm going to just talk a little bit about Gurdjieff now. Gurdjieff was an Eastern esotericist, and he had a huge following. He's basically a philosopher. He'd gone to an ashram in India. Apparently he spent a lot of time there, had learned whatever their knowledge and secrets were in certain areas. He came back to Europe and began to just teach, and he had a following there. But he had some very different ideas about the nominal world, the world of natural law, that he began to share, and this is what piqued people's interest. Probably some of you know the story, the biblical story about the walls of Jericho. So I mean, basically the idea was by marching around a city, blowing musical instruments and making a certain kind of sound, caused the walls to crumble down. Some of you may have also heard about the story about how the National Geographic went to Tibet and videotaped decades ago. It was a ceremony where they were levitating stones. Does that sound familiar? No? Okay, well, there's some kind of a festival that they have, and I believe it's annual, and I think it's some kind of, if I remember correctly, it's some kind of festival of the moon or something. And so what they do, if you have the lamas, they come out, or at least before China invaded, they would come out in succession, dressed up with different kinds of, musical instruments. They would gather at the base of a cliff, and they would form a concave circle, and they had a certain selection of instruments. And one of the instruments is like, you may have seen like the very long Tibetan kind of blowhorn. It's so big they put it on the ground. And what they're doing is they're directing sound waves towards the base of this cliff. And they were told, the National Geographic team was told that their intention was to lift the boulders way up in the air, so they went to the very top of the cliff and over onto the other side. So it's like, okay, sure, go ahead, let's do it. We'll videotape this. So apparently they actually did do this. They caused these massive boulders to levitate and shoot up the side of the cliff. And what happened was, when the National Geographic had all their footage, and they were going back to Britain, they were met by the British Secret Service, and they had all the materials annexed, and they were told to shut up. And so, yeah. So let's take a look at Gurdjieff, because this is really important to getting an understanding of the frequency technology here. Can everybody, I'm just going to read, and is everybody okay if I just read some content to you?
Yeah, good.
I just got to find where I put it here. And I'll try to make this bigger so that people can see this. So Gurdjieff's views on the subject of music, and indeed on art in general, stem from his differentiation between what he terms subjective and objective art. Most of the music we know, he says, is subjective. Only objective music is based on an exact knowledge of the mathematical laws that govern vibration of sounds and the relationship of tones. In either case, the particular configuration of sounds will evoke a response in the human psyche, in which the relation of the tones and their sonic qualities will be translated into some form of inner experience. This phenomena appears to be based on a precise mathematical relationship between the properties of sound and some aspect of our receptive apparatus. It is difficult to speak of the response to what could be considered objective art. It would appear to transcend the ordinary associative process which we have all experienced. In most of the music we know, at least within the common experience of a given culture, certain progressions and qualities of tones, as well as their combination and spacing in time, will evoke in the listener particular sensations and emotions that are shared in common with others. This phenomena is as undeniable as it is seemingly inexplicable. It must result from a sympathetic resonance activated within the listener, which can, moreover, also trigger associations with past experience. Even when the connection between the sound and memory is obscure or unknown. In most art, this power of vibration is used with only partial knowledge of the process and its consequences. Limited by his subjective consciousness, what the artist transmits can produce no more than an equally subjective response. It is therefore Gurdjieff's contention that the results of this subjective expression are accidental and even produce opposite effects in different people. There can be no unconscious creative art, he asserts. Conversely, objective music is based on a precise and complete knowledge of the mathematics determining the laws of vibration, and will therefore produce a specific and predictable result in the listener. Gurdjieff gives as an example a non-religious person coming to a monastery. Hearing the music that is sung and played there, the person feels the desire to pray. In this instance, the capacity to bring someone into a higher interior state is given as one of the properties of objective art. The effect, depending on the person, differs only in degree. What is paramount then in objective music is the exactness of its intention and the mastery of means to realize that intention. All the arts, according to Gurdjieff, were in ancient time related to the laws of mathematics and served as repositories of higher knowledge about man and the cosmos, encoded in various forms and thus preserved from later distortion. Even if the inner meaning were for periods of time forgotten, the text remained intact, the essence within waiting to be rediscovered. This view of art is reflected in the cosmological side of Gurdjieff's teaching, and especially in his use of the musical scale as a model of the universe, mirroring the two great laws which govern all cosmic processes. The form of music is seen as a microcosm expressing on a scale of sound perceived by the human ear the same dynamics that comprise all cosmic movement. Thus, the law of three, with its positive, negative, and reconciling forces, is echoed in the triadic structure. I'm going to just stop there because it goes into some of the techniques of his particular take on how it works, which is fine. But I want to just give you a couple of examples here. I've had a lot of friends that are musicians, and some of them have been better than others. But for musicians that are, say, partially trained formally, or fully trained formally, when you talk to them about things like objective music, they just go, huh? Because that doesn't exist. Like if you talk to an average musician in an average musical band, and you say, hey, do you think you can affect everyone in the room the same way? They'll laugh and say, well, of course not, it's art. It's like you go to an art gallery, everybody walks through the gallery, and everybody has a different feeling that they get from a painting. Well, you get subjective feelings from art that's produced subjectively. That's how it works. But you don't get subjective feelings from art that's created objectively. And the reason is this. I'm going to simplify it. And this might seem a little bit ridiculous, but what I'm saying is it's this true. So this is a square. Assume it's made out of metal. I have a flat side and I have a pointy side. You can bet that unless you're neurologically messed up, if I took this piece of metal and I went up to each of you and I stuck the pointy in to your skin and I pushed it hard, you're going to all feel it essentially the same way. There might be minor variation, but you're all going to tell me, hey, that kind of hurts. It's a sharp point. Same thing if I do it here. That's objective music. If I went up to you and I took this piece of metal and I poked it in you really hard and I moved it around and I asked you, well, how does that feel? And you'd be like, I don't know, it's all relative. It wouldn't make sense, would it? So, Gurdjieff was asked to demonstrate this publicly sometimes, and he did it a few different ways. One was he had volunteers and recruits from an army infantry barracks, and he had, I think it was somewhere around like 40 to 50 people. And they were sitting in benches, and he went to the front of the room, and they weren't really sure what to expect. But he was doing a demonstration, I'm guessing, for some of the officers there, and he had an accordion. And he played the accordion for roughly 10 to 15 minutes. And by the time he was done, every single person that was sitting in the room was weeping profusely, tears streaming down their eyes. Every single one. You can't go typically to an average musical show I mean, if you go to like some crazy rock band, you might see everybody's cheering and yelling. But it's not really the effect of the musician. It's pretty much the effect of the environment and their own kind of mania and group, whatever. But what Gurdjieff said was that he could specifically direct emotion, happy, sad, angry, whatever, uniformly by the application of objective music, objective art. So how could he do this? Well, while he never really publicly released the secrets of it outside of his own inner circle, but the secrets were related to geometry. And for those of you that may not have caught the last two sessions, we actually covered a bunch of information that is a prelude to what I'm about to jump into. So if you missed that, or if you don't remember everything, it's been videotaped by our good friend here, and it will be available, so I suggest that you might want to go back and get like a fundamental foundation, because we're now going to jump into some pretty more meaty, complex stuff based on that. One of the things that I discovered, was somewhat by accident, was that every single thought, every single emotion, every single state that we have has an associated geometric complex. And what's really interesting is that a given geometric form, a precise geometric form, will be found to be uniformly the same with an average mean across a certain population. So what that means is if we take 100 people and we were to map the topology of what joy looks like geometrically, we will find that the overall geometric form is relatively uniform with minor variance. Now obviously, the more specific the focus of emotion, thought, or behavior, the more complex and filigreed the geometry becomes. And then you begin to have more variation. The more basic the emotion, the more basic the thought pattern, the more basic behavior, the more it becomes uniformly mean across the population. So this is really helpful to know for a number of reasons. And I mentioned this in one of our previous sessions, and it's important to reiterate this here. During the course of my study and during the course of our group study, we have about 6,000 people that follow my work globally, and a lot of them collaborate together, and we share experimental results. Was that in every single case, and this is actually backed up by white papers that only in the last few years have actually addressed the issue, that in every single case of unwellness or disease, there is always an introduction of asymmetry into the organism. And we certainly know that in the case of cardiac arrest, that the heart begins to fibrillate. It goes through a chaotic spasm. And what's really weird about heart attacks is that, I mentioned this again, is that you have the heart, when the heart is about to go into arrest, it starts to fibrillate. In other words, it's spasming. And then after the spasm, it then falls to a kind of basin point. It falls to a kind of static plateau. And what that means is you've got a spastic chaos and then a sort of static state. And so if it goes to the static state, then you've got a problem because the person's basically dying, and then you have to like apply jumpers or whatever it is. And what they found was that the reason some joggers who've been jogging for a long time will suddenly out of the blue have a heart attack is because there is a stressor being put on the rhythm of the heart itself, which is causing the heart to go into a repetitive, very kind of minimalized and focused type of stress. They said a healthy heart has two things. A healthy heart, where you've got a person that is balanced and happy and emotionally okay, they have a blend of harmony, order, and a little bit of chaos. So it's happy enough to be spontaneous, but it's organized and ordered enough to actually function. So if you go hard either way, you go into chaos or you go into super order, you're getting into dangerous territory. So what you need to have is both. What's the reason for this? One of the things that I found with the geometry of emotion and thought was that it's always elasticizing. So I developed instrumentation and methods. One time I was at a group and I said I had figured out a way to mathematize emotions. And the angry cry that went out from different people are just like, you can't cage poetry. How dare you even try to say you can mathematize emotions? And I think in their head what they were trying to say is I was trying to take a reductionist view, that I was trying to say that you know, emotions are only math, or that math, you know, is only required to generate emotions, etc., which is not what I was saying at all. But if you take a look at any emotional state, like the state that you're in right now, you are in a constant state of flux. You have one homogeneous, or you could call it a sort of a super coherent field, and within that field you have a number of smaller subfields. And we'll actually, hopefully if they get the internet working, I can show you some really funky videos that kind of illustrate this. But when you're emoting, when you're thinking, you're going through your moment-to-moment process, there are literal fields of energy that are expanding and contracting, and they're inside of these fields, which are spherical, by the way, are filaments, and they're always changing. They're striated. So if you could actually look at your body, what you'd see would be something that looked like a collection of bubbles inside of a big bubble, and they're colorful, and they're always flashing on and off like Christmas lights. You're like a big walking crystal ball with all these beautiful little balls inside flashing and tinkling, and you can actually turn that into sound. Let me give you an example in the real world of how this works. Second here to get this rolling. And if you guys want, we can take a break in about. Are you guys okay if we take a break in about 20 minutes roughly?
Sure.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. Bear with me for a second here. No. Elaine, I'm trying to play this MP4 file. It's a video file.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having trouble with Dami's computer. Should I just use Winamp?
You can try, yeah.
It should work in iTunes, actually.
Oh, the video?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, man. Yeah, I'm actually not really huge on consumer electronics. They throw me every time. So I'm going to try and open it with iTunes. Okay, cool. So just check this out. Well, now what's going on? Did I lose it?
Something went.
So just what I want, this is not CGI, this is actually a device this guy has created, so it's projecting this hologram. And notice how it moves in relation to his movement. And for him, he's probably doing this because it's just like it's a funky experiment to work with audio and sound. But there's actually something very strange and bizarre about this entire event that you're witnessing, and I'm going to discuss it with you in a second. Okay, just going to let that run. I want you to visualize something. You know, at the center of each snowflake, you have a hexagonal core. And this is something I've never discussed publicly before, and it's one of the things I suppose you could say is a kind of discovery of mine. Most people don't realize that all snowflakes are maps. Every single snowflake you've ever seen is a map of its spatial and temporal coordinates through